In my family, red never meant losses. It meant selection. The glass conference hall sat at the very top of the tower, where the city looked less like a place and more like a system. Veins of light ran through the streets below, pulsing between skyscrapers, intersections glowing like clustered nodes. From up here, it was easy to believe everything was orderly, regulated, controlled. Cold light washed over the table, the walls, the people. It flattened faces into professional masks. The air smelled like metal and burnt coffee. I stood at the head of the table, fingers wrapped around a slim control stylus, posture perfect, voice calibrated. The good son, the ideal officer, the man who made risks disappear. As you can see, liquidity remains stable across all primary divisions, I said, and a cascade of numbers bloomed in the air. Blue. Green. Acceptable. Forecasts for the next quarter suggest moderate contraction, but no structural threat. Murmurs of approval. Subtle nods. The board liked when words like moderate and no threat shared the same sentence. I flicked my wrist. The chart shifted. One line dipped. Then another. The color gradient slid, almost lazily, from amber into something darker. Red. Not emergency red. Not yet. The kind of red that pretended to be a warning while quietly becoming a verdict. I felt it before anyone spoke. A tightening under my ribs, the faint, traitorous tremor in my fingers. I adjusted my grip, smoothed it out, kept my expression neutral. Anomaly in Sector 7, I continued evenly. Still within corrective range. The words still landed heavier than it should have. One of the senior alphas leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Another exchanged a glance with the woman beside him. The room's temperature didn't change, but something in the air did. The sound of breathing. The way attention sharpened. The red spread. Not fast. Not dramatic. I'd spent my career learning that systems rarely collapse in explosions. They collapse in drips. Simon, the chairwoman said calmly. Clarify the risk classification. I opened my mouth. Before any sound came out, my personal terminal vibrated once against my wrist. A soft, discreet pulse. Priority channel. I didn't look immediately. I finished the sentence. Closed the chart. Let the numbers freeze. Then I flicked my gaze down. A single line of text glowed on the inside of my cuff. Protocol notice. External observer assigned by the Council of Pack Regulators. Name, Nicholas Kane. Status, en route. For a fraction of a second, my vision tunneled. External observers were rare. Council-appointed ones even more so. They weren't consultants. They weren't auditors. They were what arrived when internal systems were no longer trusted to choose correctly. I felt it then. The sense I'd had as a child. Standing at the top of the stairs when thunder rolled somewhere too close to count. Not fear. Anticipation. The body's quiet recognition that something large was moving. I assume, the chairwoman said, you've received the notice. Yes, I replied. My voice didn't betray me. I'd trained it better than that. The doors at the far end of the hall slid open without ceremony. No announcement. No assistant. No security detail. He walked in alone. Tall. Dark coat instead of a corporate jacket. No visible insignia. He moved without hurry, as if the pace of the room was something he observed, not participated in. Alpha. I didn't need scent markers or status readouts to know that. My body reacted before any professional category formed. Heat. Low and instinctive. Under the skin. A tightening along my spine. The faint, irrational urge to straighten and bare my throat or bare my teeth. The ancient indecision of every beta who has learned to survive between. Nicholas Kane stopped a few steps inside the hall. His gaze passed over the board, the charts, the architecture. Then it found me. There was no challenge in his eyes, no dominance display, no easy charm, just attention. The kind that didn't slide away. For a moment, I had the absurd thought that he wasn't here to look at the company. He was here to look at what the company had decided to become. He inclined his head slightly. Polite. Formal. And then his eyes lingered on mine. A second longer than protocol required. Long enough for something unnamed to shift. Quietly. In my chest. The board meeting dissolved the way all of them did, not with closure, but with controlled dispersion. Chairs slid back. Screens dimmed. Assistants reappeared as if summoned by a hidden frequency. Nicholas Kane did not move to join the clusters. He waited. That alone was strange enough. When the last director exited, the glass doors sealed again, leaving only the two of us and the city pressed flat against the windows. "Mr. Reed," he said. His voice was lower than I expected. Not heavy, not performative. Clean. The kind that didn't need to travel far to be heard. "Simon," I corrected automatically. "If we're going to spend days buried in each other's internal failures, we might as well skip the ceremony." The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. "Efficiency," he said. "Good. Then you won't mind if we start now." We moved to the smaller negotiation room adjacent to the hall. A glass cube inside a glass cube. The illusion of privacy. Preserved. He didn't take the head seat. He chose the one beside it. Another small deviation. I keyed the table awake. Documents shimmered into the air between us. Neatly categorized. Beautifully sanitized. "So," I said lightly, "what exactly does the council hope to find that my department hasn't already documented?" His gaze didn't drop to the files. It stayed on me. "I'm less interested in what your department documents," he replied, "and more in what it corrects." I paused. "That's most of it." "Yes," he said. "That's the problem." There was no accusation in his tone. No moral weight. Just a statement, like gravity. I leaned back a fraction. "Let a sliver of irritation show. If you're here to philosophize about compliance, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. We deal in numbers, behaviors, patterns." "Exactly," he said. "And I want to see the ones that don't make it into reports." He finally glanced at the projections. He didn't skim them. He didn't pretend interest. He watched the margins. "You flag risk by financial exposure," he continued. "But you correlate it to personnel movement, internal reshuffles, sudden resignations." "Why?" I hesitated. Most observers started with profit. He'd started with people. "Because instability shows up in bodies before it shows up in balance sheets," I said. "Teams fracture. Decision-making slows. Health claims spike. Patterns form." "Loss," he murmured. "Stress," I corrected. His eyes lifted again. "Stress is how systems justify loss." There was a pause. I became acutely aware of the room. The low hum in the walls. The distant elevators. The faint metallic note beneath the filtered air. And under that, something warmer. Skin. Scent. Alpha. But not the aggressive, branded kind the corporate board favored. His smelled quieter. Like rain on hot glass. "You're not here to audit," I said. "No." "To consult." "No." "To observe," he answered. "Which means I don't fix. I confirm." "Confirm what?" "That the mechanism functions as intended." "And whose intention would that be?" This time, he smiled. Briefly. "That's one of the archives I'll need access to." I blinked. "Archives?" "Family records," he specified. "Foundational contracts. Legacy compliance logs. Pre-digital documentation. That material is sealed." "Yes. For a reason." He inclined his head. "Every sealed system is..." Silence. Stretched. "Not uncomfortable. Measured." "I can authorize limited access," I said carefully. "If you specify scope." "I already have," he replied. "Your founding agreements. Succession clauses. Any covenant that predates the current corporate charter." I studied him. Most external operatives wanted power structures, voting matrices, asset chains. He wanted origins. "You're looking in the wrong direction," I said. "On the contrary," he replied. "I'm looking in the only one systems don't like to face." I stood, signaling the end of the session. "I'll initiate a review. Expect delays." "I always do." We walked out together. The corridor was long, glossy, lined with muted art and silent doors. Our footsteps echoed in asynchronous rhythm. At the elevator bank, he stopped. So did I. "Mr. Kane," "Nicholas," he corrected gently. I exhaled through my nose. Nicholas. Whatever you think you're about to uncover, I recommend remembering one thing. What's that? My family doesn't keep skeletons, I said. We keep systems. His gaze met mine again. Steady, unimpressed. Those are harder to dismantle, he said. But they scream louder when you touch the right nerve. The elevator chimed. Doors slid open. He stepped inside. And as the doors began to close, I had the irrational, unsettling realization that I didn't want them to. Not yet. The sublevels of the tower were never meant to be seen. Not in the way upper floors were seen, polished, curated, architecturally persuasive. These were maintenance arteries, storage veins, infrastructural muscle. The places where systems went to forget their own origins. The elevator descended past authorized access. Past the floors even executives rarely visited. The light inside dimmed from corporate white to something older, bluer, colder. By the time the doors opened, the air had changed. Paper had a smell, not like books, like dust held together by memory. A dry mineral scent, threaded with something faintly metallic. Cold settled into my coat almost immediately. The archive doors stood before me, layered with outdated security plates and ceremonial seals. Half the protection was symbolic. The other half was obsolete. I overrode both. The first protocol yielded to my credentials. The second required a code sequence no longer taught to new officers. My grandfather's generation had preferred locks that demanded ritual, not convenience. When the doors parted, the sound was not a hiss. It was a breath. Inside, the archive stretched in narrow aisles of compact shelving, their surfaces dull, unlabeled. Motion sensors woke in a staggered ripple, pale lights blooming overhead. I stepped in alone. The temperature dropped another degree. My footsteps sounded wrong here. Too present, as if I were interrupting something that had been successfully silent for decades. I activated a search lattice. Keywords glimmered into being, suspended in air, founding, covenant, debt, blood. The system hesitated, then responded. One aisle unlocked. The shelves there were older, physical files bound in composite skins, tagged by hand. I pulled the first volume free. Read Industrial Charter, Preliminary. The pages were thicker than modern sheets. Cream-toned, some annotated in ink. Some marked in a hand I recognized from framed documents in the family estate. My grandfather's. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I exhaled, slow, through my nose, not to steady myself, to delay, because my body had already begun to react. A low nausea pooled in my stomach, not sharp, not yet, the kind that crept. My shoulders were tight without memory of tensing, fingers colder than the air warranted. I opened the book. The first pages were predictable. Corporate language before corporations had perfected the art. Statements of unity, of growth, of obligation. Then the vocabulary shifted, not to mysticism, to law. Clause structures thickened, definitions nested, authority displaced, and there it was. Addendum 4, First Blood Provision. My throat closed. I read it once, then again, slower. The language was almost elegant. In the event that the House's cumulative obligation exceeds the regulatory threshold, one member of the founding line shall be seated under council jurisdiction to satisfy generational balance. Seated, not transferred, not assigned, seated. My vision flickered. Not dizziness. Memory. The way my grandfather's hand had always rested on my shoulder at public events. Heavy, proud, possessive. The way he used to say, "You're good at carrying things, Simon. You don't spill." I turned pages. Supplementary files were clipped behind the addendum. Lists, case notes, council receipts, non-disclosure affirmations, names. Some struck distantly familiar chords. Others were ghosts. Dates spanned decades. Next to several, status, resolved. No death certificates. No transfers. No corporate reassignment. Just absence. The nausea crested. I braced one hand against the shelving, surprised by how solid it felt. How necessary. Another folder caught my attention. Thinner, newer. Compliance integration. Generation 7. My generation. The contents were procedural, methodological, flowcharts mapping fiscal fluctuations to personnel distributions. Risk corridors overlaid with psychological profiles. I knew these systems. I had helped optimize them. I had authored 2 of the review models referenced in the margins. My chest tightened as the realization aligned, neat and devastating. Compliance didn't prevent the debt. Compliance curated it. It didn't erase the red. It made sure the red could always be answered. A final file remained unattached at the back of the folder. Digital storage, sealed in an outdated crystal wafer. I slotted it into the reader. The interface blinked to life, text resolving in pale blue. Candidate evaluation, active cycle, metrics scrolled, health, stability, social position, psychological resilience, institutional utility. Then the header finalized. Primary designation, Simon Reed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, not in panic, in recalibration, as if some internal system had been running a lie so long it didn't know what to do with the truth. The screen waited, and my name waited with it. Designated. Primary. Candidate. I didn't remember the elevator ride back up, only the moment the doors opened on my floor, and the tower's clean, curated night reasserted itself around me. Soft lighting, soundless carpet, the city beyond the glass, now a web of distant gold instead of veins. My office recognized me and woke. Walls brightened, screens unfolded, climate shifted by half a degree. The system did everything right. My body didn't. My hands were still cold. My stomach hadn't decided whether it wanted to empty or fold inward. The name on the archive screen lingered behind my eyes like a burn-in. Primary candidate. I sealed the doors, killed the transparent displays. Only the far wall remained glass, the city a suspended circuit. Then I triggered the external call. Nicholas didn't keep me waiting. He entered minutes later, coat still on, hair slightly disordered, as if he'd run a hand through it and stopped halfway. The corridor lights framed him in a pale line before the doors slid shut again. For a second, he simply looked at me. Not polite this time. Not observational. Intent. You accessed it, he said. Not a question. Yes. How much? All of it. Something like relief crossed his face. Brief. Immediately buried. Then you know, he said. I laughed once. It came out wrong. Too sharp. I know my grandfather designed a family tradition that turns debt into disappearance. I know my department exists to make sure it stays efficient. And I know, I stepped closer before I meant to, that the system has already written my name in. His gaze didn't flinch. They didn't have to, he replied. It was always going to be you. The words landed exactly where the nausea had been. Because I'm expendable? I asked. Because you're optimal. Anger cut clean through fear. My entire professional life has been built on minimizing harm, I said. On preventing collapse. And you're telling me I optimized myself into a coffin. You optimized yourself into inevitability, he said quietly. There's a difference. I turned away before my expression betrayed too much. The glass wall reflected the city over my face, fracturing it into lines and light. When were you going to tell me? I asked. I wasn't, he answered. I pivoted back. Excuse me? You weren't supposed to know, he said. Not yet. Knowledge shifts variables. It destabilizes compliance. And now? I demanded. Now, he said. You're no longer a stable asset. The words should have sounded like threat. They didn't. They sounded like an assessment he approved of. Then what are you here for? I asked. If not to carry out the selection, he took a step closer. Not into my space. Into shared air. To end the mechanism that requires it. I searched his face for the usual things. The ambition. The savior's complex. The concealed authority. I found none. Instead, I found a kind of sharpened patience. The look of someone who had been counting something for a long time and was finally close to zero. How? I asked. By proving that these agreements are not regulatory tools, he said. They are extraction devices. Illegal ones. They generate their own crises to justify their existence. That's an accusation, I said, not a case. I know. So you need data. I need origin, he corrected. Chain of authorship, pattern of enforcement, and someone inside who can connect the operational layer to the blood layer. I understood then. Not abstractly. Functionally. You came for me, I said. Yes. The word didn't carry triumph. It carried dependence. And if you fail? I asked. Then the council will formalize the selection, he said, and I will be required to confirm it. The room seemed to tilt, only slightly, enough to remind me that balance was a posture, not a condition. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. My fear didn't vanish. It reorganized into something narrower, sharper, manageable. What do you need? I asked finally. His shoulders eased a fraction, as if some internal calculation had resolved. Access, he said, and time, and your willingness to dismantle what you built. I huffed a breath. That's not a small ask. No, he agreed. I studied him. The quiet intensity, the absence of corporate polish, the way his attention didn't drift. You're not here to choose a body, I said. No. He met my eyes. I'm not looking for someone to give, Nicholas said. I'm looking for something to destroy. The family residence sat on a private tier of the city, lifted above the commercial districts like a thought too expensive to finish. The tower was older than our corporate headquarters, its lines softened by time, its security systems updated just enough to pretend nothing beneath them had changed. I hadn't lived here since I was 19. The elevator opened directly into the main level. No reception, no desk. Just space. Polished stone. Muted light. Art that didn't ask to be looked at so much as acknowledged. My mother was waiting near the panoramic windows, a cup in her hands. Tea, I realized dimly. She always drank tea when she needed to say something difficult and wanted her hands occupied. My uncle stood farther back, leaning against the long console beneath the wall displays. Beside him was Mr. Halverson, our family's senior legal advisor. He'd been older than my grandfather and somehow hadn't aged since. No one looked surprised to see me. Simon, my mother said softly. She smiled. Not falsely. Carefully. Mother. I stopped a few steps in. Uncle Mr. Halverson. The door sealed behind me with a quiet finality. For a moment we performed the ritual of family politeness. Questions about work, about the council observer, about whether I was sleeping. Then I said, You knew. My mother's fingers tightened around the porcelain. Halverson answered, Of course. The word settled into the room like dust. You knew, I repeated. About the provision. About the selections. About what happens when the balance goes red. Yes, my uncle said. He didn't look away. He never did. We've always known. How long, I asked. Was I a contingency plan? A faint crease appeared between my mother's brows. Simon, was it before or after I was old enough to understand financial modeling? I pressed. Before or after I started running simulations for the compliance division. Halverson exhaled through his nose. This isn't personal. I laughed. That earned me a sharper look from my uncle. Everything about this is personal, I said. It's written into our blood. Blood is exactly why it isn't, Halverson replied. It's structural. The house agreed to this long before you were born. Agreed, I echoed. Or benefited from. My mother stepped closer. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, cultivated, utterly out of place against the iron in my mouth. The agreement protected us, she said, when other dynasties collapsed. When regulatory purges erased entire lines, we endured, at the cost of erasing our own, I said. My uncle straightened. At the cost of preserving the majority. There it was, not cruelty, accounting. You trained me to mitigate risk, I said quietly. To isolate unstable variables. To absorb pressure so it didn't fracture outward. Yes, my mother said, because you were good at it. Because you were born for it. my uncle added. I felt something hollow open behind my ribs. And when did that turn into this? I asked. When did good at it become useful enough to lose? My mother reached out, then stopped herself, her hand hovering between us like an aborted instinct. You've always been different, she said. Not dominant, not reactive. You observe, you stabilize, you take responsibility without being asked. That makes you... She searched for the word. Reliable, Halverson supplied. Strategically sound. My vision sharpened unpleasantly. Say it, I said. They didn't want to. Which meant it was true. Say it, I repeated. My uncle did. You were always the most suitable, he said evenly. The least disruptive loss. Loss, not son, not family. Loss. My hands clenched. I hadn't realized they were shaking until I forced them still. So that's it, I said. I wasn't raised. I was buffered. No, my mother said quickly. You were loved. I looked at her. I believe you, I said. And meant it. Which hurt more. But love doesn't negate utility. It just makes it easier to justify. Her eyes shone. But she didn't deny it. The house cannot survive another uncontrolled deficit, Halverson said. The council will formalize the process. Nicholas Kane's presence makes that inevitable. Or interruptible, I said. 3 gazes sharpened. You will not antagonize the council, my uncle warned. I already exist as its asset, I replied. I don't think it gets more antagonistic than that. Silence pooled between us. Finally, my mother spoke. Her voice was very soft. You always were the best of us at understanding necessity, she said. At doing what others couldn't. I felt the last, stubborn hope loosen. You always were, she finished. The most suitable. She stepped closer. You always were, my mother said. The most fitting choice. By midnight, the tower had shed its corporate voice. The daytime hum, assistants, schedules, notifications, faded into a low infrastructural murmur. The lights in my office dimmed automatically, shifting from white to a softer spectrum. Outside the glass wall, the city glowed in scattered gold and blue, less a system now than a constellation. Nicholas sat across from me at the long desk, jacket draped over the back of the chair, sleeves rolled to his forearms. The table between us was layered with documents, projections hovering like translucent cards, compliance trails, council directives, legacy clauses mapped into modern enforcement channels. We had been working for hours. Coffee had gone cold twice. I replaced it again, pushing a fresh cup toward him. Thank you, he said, and this time the word carried something almost personal. Our shoulders were closer than they had been before, not intentionally, just incrementally, as if the space between us had been quietly dissolving while we focused on anything else. Your grandfather was meticulous, Nicholas said, scanning a record. Almost obsessive. He believed systems failed when people grew sentimental about them, I replied. He said sentiment was where inefficiency hid. And yet, Nicholas murmured, he built an entire tradition out of blood. I exhaled. He liked contradictions. They made power feel philosophical. He glanced up. And you? I hesitated. I liked fixing things. That's not an answer, he said. It's the first one, I corrected. I was good at seeing where pressure would build, where something would fracture before it did. Making myself useful felt stabilizing. For them, he said. And for me, I admitted. If I was the one holding the weight, nothing else had to. His gaze stayed on me. Not evaluative, not distant. Who held it when you were a child? He asked. The question struck deeper than the others. No one, I said after a moment. That was the point. Silence settled again. But it had changed. It no longer felt procedural. Nicholas shifted, angling slightly toward me. Close enough now that I could register details I'd been professionally ignoring. The faint scar along his knuckle, the darker edge at the roots of his hair, the subtle warmth that seemed to radiate from him even in the cool air. Why did you join the council? I asked. He considered. I thought regulation could replace violence, that if we made systems precise enough, No one would have to disappear to preserve them. And now? And now I think systems are just violence that learned how to speak politely. A faint, humorless curve touched his mouth. You don't smell like them, I said, before I could stop myself. His brow lifted slightly. Like who? The board. The other corporate alphas. I gestured vaguely. They all carry the same, processed sharpness. Like something filtered too many times. And the first? Rain, I said, and then quietly regretted how intimate that sounded. On hot surfaces, something unreadable passed through his eyes. Most people describe power, he said, not absence. I notice absence, I replied. It's where the structure shows, our gaze is held. The distance between us was no longer abstract. It was measured in breath. Nicholas reached for a file near my hand. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing, barely a contact. But my body reacted as if a circuit had closed. Heat traveled up my arm, sudden and unmistakable. My breath caught, not sharply, but enough to betray me. He stilled. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew his hand. I should move, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed. Neither of us did. The city's reflection layered itself over his face in the glass, lines of light tracing his cheek, his throat. I became aware of my own pulse, of the way the room seemed to have shrunk to the space we occupied. Nicholas lifted his hand again, not to take the file, to rest his fingers, open, on the table between us. An offering, a pause. I placed my hand there too, not on his, near enough that warmth crossed the gap, not touching, but no longer separate, and in that measured, suspended space, between protocol and skin, something fundamental shifted. The distance between us was no longer neutral. We stopped pretending it was research. What we were building no longer resembled an investigation. It was an autopsy. The table was cleared of everything but layers of interconnected projections, timelines braided with financial arcs, regulatory mandates overlaid with internal transfers, personnel attrition mapped against market fluctuations. Nicholas moved through them with slow precision, reordering, isolating, testing causality. I watched the pattern emerge the way you watch an image surface in chemical solution. First, shapes, then relationships, then intent. Here, he said, expanding a sequence from 20 years earlier. The first recorded deficit spike, after the council codified generational covenants. The chart blossomed outward. A brief drop, a quiet board intervention, a sealed review, and 3 months later, a voluntary departure from one of the founding lines. I pulled another layer into place. And here, 10 years later, artificial contraction in regional liquidity. Short-lived. Fully corrected within 2 quarters. Nicholas's fingers moved, weaving the data streams together. And a new session, he said. Every time, we built forward, backward, sideways. No one event proved anything, but the network did. It showed stress patterns engineered just high enough to cross regulatory thresholds, investment redirections that made no strategic sense until viewed as triggers, compliance protocols written not to prevent crises, but to distribute them. The council didn't respond to debt. They cultivated it, across houses, across dynasties, across sectors. The provisions were old, but the machinery was constantly modernized, refined, integrated into fiscal systems that looked neutral from the outside. My stomach twisted as the scale widened. Not just us, I murmured. Nicholas shook his head. Not even primarily you. We stood in the middle of it, the projections floating around us like a frozen storm. How many? I asked. Conservatively? He said. Hundreds, over the last century. Uncounted if you include failed lines. The word failed landed differently now. I stared at the web of consequences, at the way disappearances punctuated profit margins, how absence stabilized growth curves. I wrote part of this, I said. The personnel volatility index, the adaptive risk filters. Yes, Nicholas said gently. You helped them make the losses cleaner. Not kinder. Cleaner. The horror of it didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as clarity. I thought I was building safeguards, I said. But I was building a better blade. He didn't contradict me. We can prove this, he said after a moment. The origination chain, the cyclical triggers, the Council's jurisdictional overreach. It violates 3 modern regulatory compacts and at least 1 international charter. That won't matter, I said. Not without visibility. He met my gaze. Exactly, I understood. We could present this to internal tribunals, to oversight committees. It would vanish into sealed proceedings, buried under proprietary protections and necessary sacrifices. The mechanism would adjust. The blood would continue. The only leverage, I said slowly, is to make it impossible to contain. Yes, which means exposure, I continued. Open session, cross-faction presence, records broadcast before they can be reclassified. Yes, and it means, I added, they will move to formalize the selection immediately. Nicholas's jaw tightened. They will. I felt the familiar pull of control rise instinctively, the urge to mitigate, to reduce harm, to find a way to reroute the damage away from myself. It didn't fit anymore. Responsibility pressed heavier, not just for me, for the people whose names I'd read, for the systems I'd helped sharpen. We don't have time to make this elegant, I said. No, he agreed. We have time to make it irreversible. The word vibrated through me. Irreversible meant casualties, careers, protection, status. It meant my family. It meant him. It meant me. Nicholas deactivated the projections one by one, the storm collapsing into nothing. There's one path that forces council jurisdiction into the open, he said. The quarterly convergence, full regulatory attendance, public procedural requirements, the day of report, I said. Yes, my pulse answered. I imagined standing there, council eyes, corporate alphas, the weight of protocol pressing from every side, and me, with a weapon I had never intended to build. We do it there, I said. He watched me carefully. Not to confirm the plan, to confirm me. You understand what happens after, he said. Regardless of outcome. I won't be protected, I said. Or positioned, or contained. No, he said. You'll be loose. The word should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like the first honest description of freedom I'd ever heard. I looked at the dark glass wall, at the city's pulsing network beyond it. There's no way back from this, I said. Nicholas stepped closer, close enough now that his presence registered without thought. No, he replied. There isn't. The roof was never meant for people. It existed for systems, antennae, climate exchangers, maintenance rigs that hummed softly in the dark. The city opened around it without walls, wind slipping unchecked across concrete and steel. Far below, streets glittered like broken circuitry. Up here, the air tasted thinner, cleaner, sharper. I stood near the edge, coat pulled tight, the night pressing cold fingers through the fabric. Nicholas joined me without a word. For a while, we only listened to the wind thread itself through the machinery. I can get you out, he said finally. I didn't turn. Out where? Off-grid districts, council blind zones. There are routes. He paused. I've used them. The idea surfaced fully formed, not as fantasy, but as logistics. New names, unregistered spaces, a life where the tower did not exist. Tonight, he continued, before the council accelerates protocol. Once they sense instability, they won't wait. And the mechanism? I asked. His silence was answer enough. They'll find another candidate, I said. Another, most suitable. Yes. I exhaled slowly. The city's glow blurred against my vision. So this is what protection looks like, I murmured. Substitution. His head snapped toward me. It's survival. For who? I asked. For you. I turned then. The wind caught his coat, pulling it back from his frame. He looked almost unreal against the city, not elevated, not framed by glass. Just there. You don't get to make that trade for me, I said. His jaw tightened. I get to refuse to watch you be processed, and I get to refuse to vanish so the machine stays clean. He took a step closer. You think martyrdom will dismantle this? It won't. It will satisfy it. I'm not talking about dying, I said. I'm talking about exposing. Exposure without protection is execution, he shot back. Anger flared, not hot, but sharp. And flight without confrontation is consent, I replied. The words cut both ways. I felt them do it. Nicholas dragged a hand through his hair, a rare breach in his composure. You're asking me to stand next to you while you light a fuse under yourself. I'm asking you to stand next to me, I said, not to pull me away from it. For a moment, I thought he might turn, might walk back toward the stairwell, toward the last remaining exits that still led somewhere neutral. Instead, he stepped closer. Close enough that the wind could no longer thread between us. This isn't detached, he said quietly. This isn't professional. I can't. Observe this. I don't want you to, I answered. The space between us collapsed. The first contact was accidental, his hand brushing my wrist as he moved, my fingers catching his sleeve. But neither of us corrected it. The second wasn't. He kissed me like he'd been holding something in place and had just lost the strength to keep it there. Not gentle. Not theatrical. Honest. There was heat in it, and something edged. A question. A refusal. My breath stuttered against his mouth, my hands finding the solid line of his shoulders as if they had always known the way. The city roared beneath us. When we parted, it wasn't far. Don't make this into an act of purity, he said, forehead nearly touching mine. This will cost you. I know, I said. That's why it means something. His eyes searched my face, not for certainty, but for fracture. I didn't give him one. Slowly, he nodded. Then I won't ask you to run, he said. But I won't pretend this doesn't terrify me. Relief didn't come. Connection did. A quieter, heavier thing. If you leave, I said, voice low, I'll understand. I'm not leaving, he replied. I drew a breath that tasted like cold and metal, and something almost alive. If I die, I said, let it not be quiet. His hand tightened around mine. I met his gaze. If I die, I repeated, let it not be quiet. The council hall was not built for truth. It was built for acoustics. Every surface curved with intention. Stone treated to absorb echo. Glass calibrated to reflect light without revealing what lay beyond it. Even the air felt engineered, cool, slow, carrying the faint antiseptic note of spaces where blood had once been spilled and later renamed something else. Regulatory convergence days always felt ceremonial. Today, it felt surgical. I stood behind the partition staging wall reserved for primary presenters, palms flat against a surface that pretended to be stone and hummed faintly with embedded circuitry. Beyond it, the hall opened in tiers, council members elevated in a crescent, corporate alphas seated in measured ranks, observers and secondary regulators occupying the outer rings. Jurisdiction made visible. Nicholas stood several meters away, across the narrow preparation zone. Not beside me, not aligned. Officially, he was here to confirm. My name would follow his. My body hadn't settled since dawn. Heat and cold traded places under my skin. My pulse didn't race. It recalibrated, jumping, stalling, surging again. There was a taste at the back of my mouth, faint and metallic. Adrenaline's quiet signature. I flexed my fingers once, twice. They steadied, obediently. Your breathing is too shallow, Nicholas said. Occupational habit, I replied. Keeps panic from announcing itself. He watched me with that same careful attention he used on data structures. You don't need to hold this alone, he said. I glanced at him. That's not how this works. No, he agreed. It's how you work. A wryness touched my mouth, despite myself. I suppose this is the part where you remind me I can still leave. I won't, he said. I searched his face, expecting to find tension, fear. What I found was resolve that didn't need performance. I will speak when the procedural breach occurs, he continued. I'll validate the records, establish jurisdictional conflict. That will buy time. Time for what? I asked. For the room to fracture, he replied. Once it does, the council can't close it again. The hall's internal signal chimed. 2 minutes. Sound dampened. Conversations beyond the partition fell into a hushed murmur. I felt the weight of what I carried not as dread, but as density. My body had adapted to holding systems. It understood this posture. "What happens to you after?" I asked quietly. He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. "I resign," he said, formally or not. "My authority ends the moment I contradict them in session. And your protection?" Was never as robust as they liked to imply. I absorbed that. "And you?" he asked. I considered the question. "There's no procedural category for what comes after," I said. "I become unresolved." His gaze softened in a way I hadn't seen before. "I'll still be here," he said. "Not promise. Statement." A council attendant approached the staging line. Gave us a nod. 30 seconds. The hum beneath the wall deepened. The hall's systems aligning. I exhaled slowly, feeling my ribs expand against the suit I'd worn for dozens of similar presentations. The same cut. The same fabric. A different function. Nicholas stepped closer. Not to touch. To share space. "You are not wrong to do this," he said quietly. I looked at him. "Neither are you," I replied. The signal shifted. The partition began to retract. Light poured in, widening into the curved enormity of the council hall. Hundreds of eyes oriented forward. The ambient murmur smoothed into silence. The dais waited. The podium waited. The space where candidates were named waited. I stepped forward, and the floor recognized me, illuminating the path to the triune stand. I walked into it, toward the center, toward the only place left that could no longer be quiet. The podium recognized me. A soft pulse beneath my palm. Identity confirmed. Presentation rights unlocked. The hall's ambient light narrowed, focusing attention forward. On me. On the place where names were given shape. "Proceed," the chair intoned. I didn't. Instead, I rerouted. The first projection that rose was not the quarterly report. It was older. Text dense. Unpolished. A scan of a document never meant to leave a physical shelf. Read Industrial Charter. Preliminary. Addendum 4. First blood provision. A ripple passed through the hall. Confusion first. Then, recognition. A few council members leaned forward. Others stiffened. "This session was convened," I said, and my voice carried farther than it ever had in boardrooms, "to formalize a selection." I lifted my hand. "So let's formalize the system that requires one." The archive unfolded, not theatrically, relentlessly. Contracts braided into timelines, financial dips overlaid with internal transfers, compliance protocols highlighted in one spectrum, disappearances in another. Names appeared. Dates, jurisdiction stamps. The visual language of bureaucracy turned into a map of absence. The chair rose. "This presenter is exceeding procedural scope." I didn't stop. "You call these generational covenants," I continued. "They are not. They are extraction devices. They manufacture deficits to justify human cession." The word human struck harder than I expected. Council security fields flickered, attempting to isolate the feed. Nicholas moved. He stepped from the observer's tier into the jurisdictional aisle, lifting his authorization crest. "Regulatory breach," he said clearly. "I am invoking cross-compartmental review." The crest flared. The feed stabilized. The chair's gaze snapped to him. "Observer Kane, you are exceeding—" "I am confirming," Nicholas interrupted, and the word cut through the hall like a blade through silk. "The documentation presented originates from council-sealed archives. It establishes origination chains linking regulatory directives to engineered financial triggers. This violates the Accord of Independent Jurisdiction and constitutes non-consensual cession." Murmurs surged. Not polite ones. Angry ones. Alarmed ones. The projections shifted again at my gesture. A list, longer than any screen could comfortably hold. "Here are the names of those seated under your provisions," I said. "Resolved, you called them. Absent, the rest of us learned to say." The nausea returned, sharp this time. But I anchored myself to it. Let it burn instead of hollow. You taught us to think in assets, I said. So we did. You taught us to stabilize systems at any cost. I looked directly at the council tier. This, I said, is what that cost looks like. The chair struck her staff against the dais. Terminate this broadcast. Council interfaces flared, attempting to fold the data back into sealed channels. Nicholas raised his voice. Any attempt to reclassify this session will be interpreted as evidence tampering, he said. All feeds are now mirrored under my authority. Authority he was about to lose, but not before he used it. A corporate alpha surged to his feet. This is sabotage. Yes, Nicholas said calmly. It is. The word carried no apology. Fear threaded through me then, not of the room, of the reach, of the fact that every sealed layer we tore open would retaliate. But alongside it came something else. Lightness. The strange, dizzying lift of pressure leaving a system. I am the designated primary candidate for this cycle, I said, and the words tore a sound from the hall I couldn't categorize. My name is Simon Reed. I am the product of the compliance architecture you refined. I am what your risk management looks like when it learns to speak. I let the projections resolve into the final schema. Council memos mapped against financial instruments, regulatory authorizations bound to forced selections. This is not debt, I said. It is a market. The chair's face had gone very still. You cannot dismantle a system by humiliating it, she said. I met her gaze. I'm not dismantling it, I replied. I'm naming it. The hall was no longer quiet. Voices rose. Delegates stood. Observers activated independent recording fields. External channels spiked. The storm we'd built moved through the space. No longer containable. No longer deniable. Nicholas's eyes found mine across the fracture. Not to steady me, to witness. And in that moment, with fear in my blood and clarity in my hands, I understood something simple and irreversible. The system was no longer closed. It was bleeding. After the hall, there was no applause. There were protocols, containment measures, emergency sessions, legal cascades that moved faster than any human reaction could follow. The council tried to fracture the narrative into procedures, to smother the rupture under layers of jurisdictional language. It didn't work. Too many channels had opened. Too many observers had recorded. Too many external bodies had standing. The tower filled with unfamiliar personnel within hours. Investigative regulators, independent auditors, representatives from compacts the council had not anticipated answering to. Floors were sealed. Others reopened under new authority. The internal hierarchy dissolved into temporary structures that felt like scaffolding erected around a collapse. I was escorted from my office that night. Not arrested, not protected, removed. My credentials were suspended pending structural review. My access stripped down to a visitor's ghost of itself. I handed over my terminal, my secure implants, the biometric ring I'd worn since my promotion to head of compliance. Each object landed in the collection tray with a soft, unremarkable sound. That was how my position ended. Not in disgrace, in inventory. The family residents did not contact me. Neither did my department. I wasn't surprised. Systems didn't reach for what had slipped outside them. News feeds bloomed with speculation, with exposed fragments, with outrage that hadn't yet found its language. Some called it a necessary purge, others a destabilizing act. The words illegal session trended in 3 regulatory blocks within the first 12 hours. I watched none of it. I spent most of the following day sitting in a temporary holding office assigned by an external review body, staring at a wall that pretended not to be temporary. There was nothing left to optimize, nothing to reroute, no risk parameters to adjust, just time, and the strange, echoing absence of a function. Nicholas arrived in the evening, not as an observer, as a private citizen. His council crest was gone, the cut of his coat different, simpler. He looked lighter and more exposed. I submitted my resignation this morning, he said. I nodded. Accepted? They didn't have a procedural category for refusal. I absorbed that. What happens now? I asked. For them? He exhaled. Tribunals. Jurisdictional conflict. fragmentation. It will take years to fully dismantle what's been formalized. And for you? A pause. I'm not assigned to anything, he said. For the first time since I was 20, the words landed between us. I realized then that I had been bracing for this moment, for the accounting of cost. What did it take from you? I asked quietly. Authority, he said. Access. The protection of structure. He met my gaze. And you? I considered the question from my side. Everything that knew where to put me, I said. Silence followed. Not heavy, just wide. Outside the narrow window, the city moved as it always had. Lights changing, vehicles threading distant routes, people inside systems neither of us could now name. I felt emptied, not broken, not relieved, hollowed of roles. And in that hollow, a quiet I had never experienced settled. It wasn't peace. It was the absence of command. I don't know what I am now, I admitted. Nicholas stepped closer. Unassigned, he said. The word didn't carry judgment, only space. We stood there. No crests, no titles, no glass between us and the night. And for the first time since I could remember, nothing was waiting for me to become useful. Only the strange, echoing quiet of having already done the thing that could not be undone. The apartment wasn't special. That was its first kindness. No security layers humming beneath the walls. No embedded systems anticipating need. Just a narrow entryway, pale wood floors, windows that opened when you turned a handle instead of authorizing a command. Morning light spilled in unevenly, catching dust in the air. The city outside sounded human. Distant traffic, someone laughing on the street below, a vendor calling out something I couldn't quite make out. I stood barefoot in the small kitchen, holding a mug I hadn't optimized the temperature of. It was too hot. I burned my tongue. I laughed. The sound surprised me enough that I had to stop and feel it again in my chest to make sure it had really happened. Nicholas leaned in the doorway, watching me with an expression that had learned new muscles. He wore an old t-shirt, sleeves pushed up, hair still disordered from sleep. There was no authority in his posture, no procedural stillness, just a man, standing where he had chosen to stand. You all right? He asked. I think, I said slowly. I've been injured by a beverage. He huffed quietly and crossed the room, taking the mug from my hand, setting it aside. His fingers brushed mine, not careful, not charged, normal. It felt radical. We moved around each other in the small space, discovering the choreography of a place not designed for distance. When he passed behind me, his hand steadied briefly at my waist, not as possession, not as claim, as orientation. My body registered it without bracing. We ate standing up. Something simple. Toast. Fruit. No data overlay. No efficiency metrics. After, we drifted out onto the small balcony. The street was waking fully now. Deliveries. Conversations. Life not arranged around outcomes. What happens next? I asked. Not because I needed a plan. Because I was allowed to wonder. Nicholas rested his forearms on the railing. There will be hearings. Requests. People who want statements. Some who want silence. Some who want to build new structures that look suspiciously like the old ones. And us? He glanced at me. We decide what we're willing to belong to. The answer didn't close anything. It opened it. I leaned beside him, feeling the solid line of his presence through the thin fabric at his arm. The city breathed below us, imperfect and ongoing. I don't know how to be unassigned, I admitted. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to notice when you're trying to turn yourself back into a function. I considered that. I notice it, I said. Constantly. A small smile touched his mouth. Good. That means it's not invisible anymore. The wind lifted, carrying the smell of bread from somewhere down the block. Warm. Ordinary. Alive. Nicholas turned toward me, not urgently, not carefully. He kissed me the way people kiss when nothing is collapsing. When there is no performance required of proximity, when closeness is not a negotiation. When he drew back, his forehead rested briefly against mine. No words, no systems, Just here. I closed my eyes. And for the first time, the quiet inside me didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. First blood isn't death. It's the moment you stop being a resource and begin, finally, to be a body that belongs to itself.